Hello, my name is Jim Varner, and in this production, Chrome Plating, the how-to video, you will learn how to chrome or rechrome aluminum, pot metal, and steel. You will learn all the procedures and steps necessary to chrome and rechrome these parts. But before we go on and show you the chemicals and how to actually do the chroming or the rechroming, I want to talk to you a little bit about safety. Personal safety in the chrome or the rechroming business is very important. The chemicals that you use are very dangerous and are dangerous to the environment. So as you can see, for body protection, I wear a full rubber apron. I always wear latex gloves. Now when I use the regular chemicals, I do wear rubber gloves also. These are chemical resistant, and these are very necessary because the chemicals that you work with, you do not want to get on your skin. Also for eye protection, you want to wear eye protection in case it splashes. Now I wear glasses, so I wear a full face shield. And of course, if you don't wear glasses, I mean, you can wear safety goggles. But again, I must stress that personal safety and protection from the chemicals is very important. So with that said, now let's talk about some of the different chemicals and different procedures that you'll do to do rechroming. Okay, now we're going to talk about the different chemicals, and you guys can see also how I kind of have this chrome shop set up. You'll see that there's copper bus bar on the back wall. That supplies the positive charge of electricity that comes from the rectifier. Now that's a 12 to 15 volt, 200 amp DC rectifier. That converts AC volts to DC, which is what you use to do your chrome plating. And you'll see that's our chrome tank there. It's chromic acid. Actually, a lot of people have the misconception that when they see a chrome part that's peeling, that it's the chrome that's peeling. Well, actually the chrome itself is like a clear coat. It's the nickel that gives you your chrome, what you call chrome color, and what you see peeling is the nickel. Now this is cyanide copper. Because we do a lot of pot metal work, you have to strike plate pot metal with cyanide copper. It's the only chemical that will stick to pot metal. Now they do make other kind of chemicals you can use, but as for what we found to work the best, we do stay with the cyanide copper. Now this chemical here is the most dangerous chemical. Well, all the chemicals are dangerous, but the cyanide copper is the critical chemical that you have to be very, very careful working around. Now as you can see, all that's in the cyanide copper tank is the two copper anodes, and it has a pump. Now there's no bubbler, a pump and a heater, and there's no bubbler in this tank. The circulation of the cyanide copper is done with the pump. If we were to put a bubbler in there, it could cause a gas to be released from there to go into the air, and you don't want to breathe this. As it is now, I mean, it's pretty safe to be around this. You really don't have anything to worry about, but you definitely want to make sure that you wear your protective gloves, your rubber chemical resistant gloves, and if you have any cuts or anything on you, you want to make sure that you do not get this liquid into any cuts. Chances of this killing you would be slim, but I mean, you would have to stick your head in there and breathe those chemicals for quite a while, and then of course you would have to get a concentrated amount of it into a cut to really, you know, kill you. But still, this is the most dangerous chemical. Now this is the bright copper tank. Now this tank here has air bubbler in it, and this consists of sulfuric acid. So this is not a very safe tank to work around either, but there's no fumes or anything coming off of this tank that can do any bodily harm. Just wear your safety equipment and be careful not to get the battery acid on you. If you do, of course, you know, with battery acid, wash it off immediately. Now the next tank, this is the bright nickel tank. It's air bubbled, also heated. We'll talk about the different heat temperatures as we go along in this video. Now you do see that it does have a recirculation pump on it, but that is only used when you charcoal filter this tank, and what that does is it cleans the impurities out of the chemical. So you don't want to run that pump. Otherwise, if you run the pump all the time, from our experience, it will cause pitting in your chrome part. And this is the most important part of the chroming, is the nickel bath. Now, as you can see, all of the tanks have heaters in them and have heater controls. Our negative feed, which is the part that we hang the part on here, this charges the part negatively, is on top. We've made this, you can build your room or your chroming shop just about any way you want to, but this is the way we prefer it. I like to hang my parts. A lot of guys just put a bar across the tank itself and hang the part. Now the bus bars you see here actually have the anodes hanging on them, and you would put the other part bar in the center and then hang the part from that. But I myself prefer having the bar on top where I can actually hang the part down. Now for doing aluminum, you also have to use two chemicals, which is D-smut and zincate. And we'll get into these when we do the part of the video when we chrome the aluminum. Now, we'll talk about some temperatures. The chromic acid, when you're doing this, of course, if you buy a chroming setup, you're going to get an instruction manual with it. The instruction manual is nowhere near as detailed as this video. But it will explain to you the operating temperatures and the procedures of how to set your tank up. Now, as you can see, we have 20-gallon tanks. These tanks are 18 inches by 12 inches by 24 inches deep. So you're limited to the size of parts you can do by the size of the tank that you do buy. But you can do longer parts by flipping the part over. You can mask it, like do half of the part, mask it, unmask it, rinse it, turn it over, and do the other side of the part. But that gets into when you get more experience in chroming. Right now we're just going to show you the basics of how everything works. So anyway, getting back to the different temperatures, it's important that all of the chemicals are heated to a certain temperature. You cannot use these chemicals at room temperature or they will not work. So we keep our chromic acid tank set at 110 degrees. Our cyanide copper tank is set at 100 degrees. Our bright copper tank is set at 85 degrees. And the nickel is the hottest tank, and that's set at 135 degrees. Now, you'll see that each tank in front of it has another 5-gallon container, and this is the rinse tank. All of these chemicals are mixed with distilled water. You cannot use regular water out of the faucet. Now we have our own RI unit where we make our own water, but you can purchase distilled water in 5-gallon containers. Now what we do here is, because these chemicals, you cannot just pour these chemicals outside in your backyard or in your sink. What we do is, as we use the rinse tanks, which are down here, what happens is that the chemical tanks themselves do evaporate because of the heat. So what we do, we just refill our chemical tank with our rinse water, which is also distilled, and then we add more distilled water to our rinse water as needed. Therefore, we have no waste. We're not throwing any of this water out in our yard or in the driveway or into the sewer systems or down our sink. So you want to read your instruction manuals about this. These chemicals are very dangerous and very, very hard on our environment. You wouldn't want to pour this out in your driveway and have your dog or one of your kids go out in your driveway and walk through this or drink this. So getting rid of this chemical is a whole different story, and we'll talk about that later. Now in this video, we're going to be working on aluminum, which we have a set of old fender emblems off of 65 Falcon. We're going to redo this piece. This is pot metal, and as you can see, it's pretty pitted and nasty looking. This is off of a 51, 52 Plymouth or Dodge. This is the rear license plate marker light. Now this is a steel bracket. This is a power steering bracket. So this will be rechroming also. And this piece here has already been chromed, but it's starting to show a little bit of rust, and it's got some pits on it. And what we're going to do with this is we're going to show you how to strip that chrome off of there and sand it and rechrome it and make it new again. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take this pot metal piece and we're going to bead blast it. Now you can sandblast this, but we prefer bead blasting because the beads don't leave as bad as pitting, imperfections in the metal. The sandblasting works also, but it requires a lot more sanding. So let's get started here and show you how this all works. Like I say, we're going to take this piece here and we're going to bead blast it, and then we'll be back. Okay, now that the part's been sandblasted, I don't know how good this is going to show up on the video, but you can see those little white spots in there. Those are all pits. You can see there it's got like a piece of the corner missing. Well, what we're going to do now is we're going to take a DA with 80 grit sandpaper on it, and I'm going to go around and I'm going to smooth that down a little bit and try to make those pits a little bit shallower than what they are now. After I do this, we'll put it in the cyanide copper for 5 minutes, and then into the bright copper, and we'll bring it out, and I'm going to solder these pits. Now you can't solder the pits on this until it's been copper coated. There's no solder or nothing made that will stick to pot metal. Now remember, this is pot metal. No solder will stick to pot metal. Now they make a special rod that you can use to solder pot metal, but the problem with it is that you have to heat the pot metal so hot to make this rod melt that the pot metal actually melts. So we're going to use solder, and the solder that I use is a rosin core. But let's smooth this out. Now like I say, I have an 80 grit sandpaper on this. Now this will probably get a little annoying for a second, but I'm going to smooth this out. I'm going to change the way this looks just a little, but not enough to hurt the part any. See that I'm still wearing the latex gloves because I don't want to touch these parts. You can actually get fingerprints. Your own fingerprints can come out in the chrome. Plus you don't want your body oils on this part either. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish sanding this, and then when we come back I'll show it to you in the chrome room there before we put it in the cyanide copper. So you can use, I have die grinders with carbon tip bits. You can also use dry die grinders and sanding. I have different kinds of sanding blocks you can use. There's all kinds of ways to shine this metal to smooth these pits out. But the main thing is to make this part as good as new again, you have to fill the pits. Now like I said before, the copper, the bright copper, will coat these parts, and you can actually build that copper 1/8 of an inch thick. But to do that, you'd have to leave the part in the copper for 6 to 12 hours, and believe me, it's a lot faster and a lot easier just to solder this part. So I'll get back to working on this piece here, and when we come back we'll be in the chroming room getting ready to go into the cyanide copper. So we'll be back shortly. Okay, now that the part has all been sanded and we made some of the pits a little smaller, but this part was pretty bad, but it'd be a good one for demonstration purposes. Now before this can go into the cyanide copper bath, excuse me, we'll have to wash this off in degreaser. Now although it's been sandblasted and it's really clean, there's probably nothing on this part at all, we definitely want to still wash it off in a degreaser solution. This is a water base, and this is heated. This is about 100 degrees. You can see I'm using a brush. I want to make sure I get down in there. I don't want any dust or anything down in these little pits, because you want the copper to stick and go down inside the pit also. So it's real important to clean your part. That's one of the most important parts of the chroming, is the cleanliness of the part. So if you think you've got it clean, there's a rule. It's clean, clean, clean. So if you think it's clean, clean it again. Because believe me, if there's any kind of dirt or grease or anything on this part, the copper or none of the plating will attach or adhere to the part, and you'll be starting over. So now that I think we got this part pretty clean, what we do now, we rinse it. This is just plain water. Now this is not distilled water. This is just plain water. The only thing we'll be rinsing there with the water is parts that we've taken out of the degreaser and parts that we've taken out of the next step, which we haven't talked about yet. This is like an acid dip. And what this does is it activates the part. Now this, a lot of people recommend, or a lot of companies will recommend that you use muriatic acid mixed with water. Well, we use fluoride because we use cyanide copper. Any kind of acid in cyanide copper will chemically react and put off a gas, and the gas that does come off that cyanide copper can kill you. So we use a fluoride, and that does not interact, in case we don't get all the acid off the part, it does not interact when we put it into the cyanide copper. Now I've attached a copper wire, and you always want to use solid copper wire, and we use 14 gauge. House wiring, we get this by the roll, but it's just a 14 gauge copper wire. And what I want to do now is I'm going to submerge this into the fluoride for 5 seconds. And you can count that off in thousands. Make sure you have your face shield on, and make sure you're wearing your chemical resistant gloves. You don't want to get any of these chemicals on you because they will burn you. They can't hurt you. So we're going to put this in here for 5 seconds. You can count it off. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005. Now before I put that back in the rinse water, I have a bottle. This is just plain water, a spray bottle. And I'm going to spray that part off. That way you keep all the activator in the activator tank and not in your rinse water. And then I'm still going to put it in the rinse water. Just rinse it off, and then I'm going to spray it again. Like I said, it's just plain water. All right, now it's ready to go into the copper tank. So while we get the camera readjusted here, and you can see the parts hanging over the copper tank, and that's suspended on the copper wire. Now I'm going to actually turn on the power before I put that in there. Because copper, both of these coppers here, start working as soon as you put them in. You don't even have to have power on them. But that will not stick, that will flake off under your other copper. So you always want to make sure that you have your power on to your copper tanks before you submerge the part. So now I've submerged the part in the copper. This is the cyanide copper. Now remember, this is the only solution that you can use to start the plating on the hot metal parts. Alright, now the voltage on this, I'm going to set my DC volts to 3. So my DC amps are probably only like 2. And you want to set the timer. You want to leave that in. You want to leave that in the cyanide copper for 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, we'll take it out of there and we'll rinse it and we'll put it into the bright copper. So we'll let this cook for 5 minutes and we'll be back. Okay, well it's been 5 minutes, so we're going to take this part out of the cyanide copper. And you can see now that it does have a copper tone to it. It is covered in copper. I got to rinse that, so we're going to go straight down to the rinse tank. Now that is just the cyanide water. That's just the cyanide copper rinse tank. And then I'm going to take just the plain water. And I'm going to spray that again. All of it goes right into the rinse tank itself. Now that is distilled water in my spray tank. You want to make sure that you keep distilled water in all your rinses because you don't want to put regular water back into your chemical tanks because they're full of chemicals itself. Regular water is not pure. That's why we use distilled water. So now I'll give you a little bit closer look here. You can see that it's all copper colored now. It is coated. Although you can still see the pits. The pits are still there. They're not filled. They're not going to fill in the cyanide. I'm going to brush this part off a little bit because sometimes the cyanide copper will leave a little flaky residue on the part. I don't want that flaky residue coming off on me in my copper. So now I'm going to put the part in bright copper. Now this part has to be soldered, so we're going to work on this after it comes out of the bright copper. So I'm going to leave it in the bright copper for about 30 minutes. Now, as like before, you want the power on. You want to give it power. Kind of adjust it in there so it's between the anodes. Now you want to set the power for the bright copper down to about 0.5, about half of a volt. And that's going to read about 1.5 amps on your amp meter. And you want to set your timer. We'll set that for 30 minutes. So we'll cook that for 30 minutes, and when that's done, we'll be back over and I'll show you how to solder the pits. Okay, now the part's out of the bright chrome, and as you can, or bright copper, and as you can see, you can still see the pit areas here. And these are all pits. And what we're going to do is we're going to solder these pits. Now you want to be careful when you're soldering that you heat. Don't try to hurry the solder. In other words, slowly heat your part, because the heat can actually buckle the copper plate that you put on the part. You don't want to do that. It will bubble. if it bubbles on you, I mean, you can sand it down. It is copper, and it's going to be sanded down anyway, but you want to try to heat it evenly and bring it up to temperature. It's also a good idea that when you start doing this that you keep going, because the part, like I say, will get hot and it will help you melt your solder in. But take your time in the soldering stage. You don't want to, if you can possibly help it, you don't want your copper to bubble. Now, like I said before, I use a rosin core solder. They make this other stuff you can buy in a tube, kind of like a syringe. I don't recommend it. I don't like it. Of course, I think you'll find you'll get your own personal preference. Bring that up to temperature kind of slow. Like I say, you want to go through, you want to make sure you fill all of the pits. Now the real tiny pits you don't have to worry about, because the bright copper will fill those pits. Like I said before, you can build the bright copper up to about 1/8 of an inch thick, but that takes so much time. You have to leave the part in the bright copper for hours. I prefer to do the soldering. Another nice thing, you get your part hot, you can just kind of flow the solder into the pit. You want to make sure that when you get your solder in, that you give it a chance to burn. In other words, melt your solder into the part, like so. You want to make sure it goes down into the pit, because if you don't get it filled from the bottom of the pit up, when you sand it, you'll sand your solder out. So you want to make sure that your solder flows. Well, I'll go ahead and solder this part, and when I get the soldering done, we'll be back. Okay, as you can see, all the pits are been soldered. You can see it kind of looks like it's got cancers all over it, but that's actually the solder. That's how many pits were in the part. Now you want to make sure that before you recopper this, that you get all the pits filled that you want to fill with the solder, because once this is recoppered, it seals in the old solder, and if you heat that again, that old solder will bubble underneath, and you'll really have a problem. So you want to make sure that all the pits that you want to fill are filled before you recopper this part. So now all you got to do is sand all these solders down and smooth everything out. And at this stage of the game is where I try to make sure the part is as perfect as it's going to be before I recopper it. I like to try to, after I'm in the solder stage, get it so it's perfect. So once it comes out of the copper, all you have to do is just final sand it with 600 grit, and then you can chrome this. So I'm going to go ahead and start sanding this and smooth it out, and I'll show you what it looks like when we come back before I put it into the copper. So we'll be back shortly. Okay, as you can see, the soldered part has all been sanded down. The only thing that you might be able to see is where the solder now has filled the pits in the piece of pot metal. Now this has to go back into cyanide copper, and then it goes back into bright copper. The reason it has to go back into cyanide copper is because the bright copper will eat this part. The acid in the bright copper will eat this part. So always, anytime you sand a part that you've coppered, if it's pot metal, especially pot metal, it has to go back into the cyanide copper, or the acid in the bright copper will eat this part. It will destroy the part. Alright, so now that this is ready, the next step, I'm going to wash this, and remember, what's the rule? Clean, clean, clean. So I'm going to clean this in the degreaser. I'm going to put this back in the cyanide copper for 5 minutes. Then I'm going to put this in the bright copper for 1 hour, and that should fill the little imperfections that I have left in this metal. So after we do that, we'll be back. Okay, while our pot metal part is in the copper, I figured we'd talk a little bit about steel. Now, steel is a little bit different than pot metal and a lot easier to work with. Excuse me. With steel, you don't have to solder the pits. We bead blasted this part, and this doesn't have any pits in it, but if it did, I would use a brazing rod and braze the pits in this. Then I would sand the pits down with 80 grit sandpaper and the DA, or maybe the grinder. Like I say, steel is a lot easier to work with. Now this part here is only one side of this part can be seen on the vehicle it goes on. So we're not going to worry too much about what it looks like on the back side of the part. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to smooth sand this part, and I'm going to get this as perfect as I possibly can. Like I say, steel is a lot easier to work with. Now, you do not need to use cyanide copper to strike coat this steel. Steel's different than pot metal. Now instead you can strike coat this with nickel, but you can't go straight to the bright copper because the bright copper will not adhere to the steel. So you either have to strike coat this in nickel or strike coat this in cyanide copper. In our instance, I always strike everything with cyanide copper, everything. So what we're going to do now is I'll go ahead and I'll smooth this part out, and this will be just like the pot metal part. It'll go 5 minutes into the cyanide copper, and then from the cyanide, and then it will be rinsed. From the cyanide copper, then it will go into the bright copper for 1 hour, and then this part will be ready for final sand and be ready to go into the nickel and then chrome. So we'll go ahead and get this smoothed out and get this in copper, and we'll be back. Okay, as you can see now, this mounting bracket for the power steering pump has all been copper plated. Now I want to show you something. This is the back side of the part. This doesn't really have to be real shiny, but this will still chrome plate and be shiny. It's just not going to have a smooth, glossy finish like we got on the other side. Wanted to show you some different ways that you could sand this. You can use a stainless steel brush. Stainless steel brush is also good for getting into areas where you can't get to when you're sanding with either the machine or by hand. And I wanted to point out that the way your part comes out in this step, this is the way your part will look in chrome. So all your major work that you do on the part you're rechroming is done in the copper stage. So the smoother you make it look in copper, of course, the better it's going to look in chrome. Now you can also use a drill with a steel brush attached to a drill. All you do as you can see that it brightens the copper underneath. This is kind of a rough surface here, but like I say, this is the side that you can't see. So you can use a stainless steel brush, you can use a wire wheel and a drill, or you can sand this with sandpaper. Now I wanted to also tell you, when you're chroming parts, if the part you're chroming has threads or is an area like where a cam moves through or something like that, you want to make sure that you put an old bolt or something down in the threads. You don't want the chemical getting in the threads because it'll plug up the threads. You won't be able to re-bolt. You won't be able to put a bolt back down through it. So it's always a good idea to plug the threads and like any type of a hole that you don't want the chrome to build up on, or the copper, because this will build up quite thick. So we're going to go ahead now and we're going to finish this. The pot metal part is all ready to go, and I'll come back in a few minutes and show you this and the pot metal part, and when you see them this time they'll be ready to go into the chrome. So we're just about finished with these parts. Okay, now we're going to do something here with that part off of the back of that 51 Buick or Plymouth that we did. Now this is all nice and shiny, as you can see. This is just the way it came out of the bright copper tank. Now this is ready to finish sand and put into the nickel. But what we're going to do here, this is how you make triple show chrome. Instead of sanding this with a 600 grade sandpaper, we're going to buff it on the buffer using a copper compound to bring out a brilliant shine. And that's where you get your triple show chrome. It's not from sanding, but it's from buffing the part. And again, you want to wear protective gear while you're using this. And also, when I do this, I'm also using a particle mask. So you want to get your wheel coated for buffing the copper, and this is how you get your triple show chrome. I just want to show you here the difference. I'm sure you can see in the video. You can see how that's nice and brilliant, shiny. Now if we were to sand that with a 600 grade sandpaper, it would be shiny, but it would still have the sanding scars in it. This again is how you get your triple show chrome. So we're going to go ahead and finish buffing this part up, and when we come back, I'll show you this part ready to go, and also the steel part that we had ready. And we're very, very short now on the time that we need before we're starting to actually do the chroming work. So we'll be back in just a few minutes. Okay, we're back. Now you can see if you can see the difference here in the video. The part for the 51 Dodge, the license plate light, is nice and shiny. The bracket for the power steering pump is shiny, but it's not shiny like the license plate light. We buffed the license plate light. That is how you get your triple show chrome. And we sanded the other part with 600 grit sandpaper. Now both of them will give you a real nice chrome shine, but the one that we buffed will be much more deeper, have a very deep shine. Now I want to point out too, while I'm thinking about it, that when you do these parts in the copper, what you see in this part when it's sitting there ready to go into the chrome is the way it will come out. If there's a pit, you're going to have the pit when it comes out. The nickel has no filling properties whatsoever. You do all your filling and all your detail work while you're in the copper. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to do the other chrome ring we were talking about. We're going to strip the chrome off of this piece so we can re-chrome it. Now this setup here is an anodized and chrome removal system. And in this system, the part is positively charged and the anodes are negatively charged. So what you're doing is you're pushing the material, the chrome plating, off of the part. So you want to give that about 1 amp per square inch, and you want to leave that in there for about 5 to 7 minutes. So we'll set the timer here for 7 minutes while that strips, and we'll be back shortly, show you how to get that part ready to re-chrome. Okay, let's get that part out of the dechroming solution. Now this part should have a yellow tint, which it does. Let me rinse that off real quick. Okay, let's see here. Rinse that in the water. Okay, now we'll inspect this part here a little bit. You can see, I don't know if it shows up very good in the video, but the chrome has been removed from this and now it has like a yellowish tint to it. Now we want to re-chrome this part, and what's on here now, what you see, is the nickel with no chrome. It's the nickel that shines, not the chrome. The chrome is actually like a clear coat, same like just like on your car. The chrome acts as a clear coat and it protects the nickel. So now what you do now, you inspect the part. Now we wanted to re-chrome this because it had a few little brown spots coming through the chrome. And what you can do with this now this like I say is nickel. So you can sand this part down with some 600 sandpaper, which I think is what we're going to do with this one. I don't see any problem, no reason why not. So we want to sand this down with some 600 sandpaper. Then we're going to put it in the metal activator, the fluoride. And what that will do is reactivate the nickel. And then from there we're going to go straight into the nickel tank with this and re-nickel it, and then it can go back into the chrome. And then you should have a nice, like new part again. So we're going to sand this down with the 600. And we're going to go ahead and get this ready for the nickel. So we'll be back shortly. Okay, now we're going to talk about aluminum. Remember the little 289 emblem we had off the Ford there? Now this is aluminum, and most of the aluminum on the old cars have a anodized coating on them. So you want to strip the anodized coating off of this, and the way I do this, now this was a pretty small part. Usually what I do, like when I'm doing a brake caliper or something, you know, bigger in aluminum, I'll put it in a bead blaster and bead blast it. But in this case, I used 400 grit sandpaper and sanded it all down smooth. Took my time. Now doing aluminum is a little time-consuming process. But I sanded it all smooth and I got all the anodizing off with the sandpaper. Then what I did is I took 600 grit sandpaper and I smoothed it out real nice. And I don't know if it shows in the video, but you can see it's got a chrome-like finish to it from me sanding this. Now the first step on doing aluminum, it's not like pot metal or steel. Aluminum is very porous. So it actually has little pores in here that could be holding dirt or grime or actually sanding material from the aluminum itself. You want to get that out. The only way that you can get that out of there, the proper way, is using an ultrasonic, which is what this is here. And you put the part in the basket, and what an ultrasonic does is it vibrates. It vibrates the fluid and vibrates the part, breaking up all of the material that could be trapped inside. Like I say, aluminum is a very porous material. So we're going to put this in here. Now we use, for our aluminum, we use a special solution that we kind of made up. Because normally you should take aluminum and put it in the metal activator, which is the fluoride, for about 10 seconds. Well, with the solution that we use, we bypass that step. We do not have to put our aluminum in the metal activator. So I'm going to let this vibrate in here in the ultrasonic for about 15 minutes. Now when we come back, we're going to take this out, we're going to rinse it. We're immediately going to go to the desmut tank and then to the zincate tank and rinse, and then we're going to go immediately to the nickel. Now all the other parts are ready to chrome, but we're going to do the aluminum part first, and then we'll nickel plate and chrome plate the other 3 remaining parts. So while this cleans itself, we'll take a break and we'll be back in a few minutes. Okay, now that we got the part out of the ultrasonic machine and we rinsed it and we attached our lead wire, we're ready to put this in the de-smut and then into the zincate, and we're going to go straight into the nickel. Now you want to make sure that when you attach your wire to this, that you get it attached securely, because aluminum needs a little bit better contact with the copper wire so that the electricity and everything flows through this properly. So the next step is you want to put that piece down into the smut. You want to keep that in there for about, oh, it's a small part, so we're going to only leave that in there for about 20 to 30 seconds. Now the reason for the ultrasonic and the aluminum parts is that because, like I told you before, the aluminum is porous. If you don't get all the dirt, grime, grease, wax, or whatever out of those pores, when you go to your nickel plate, the nickel will bubble. If that happens, you'll have to strip the part and start all over again. So the ultrasonic is very, very important. Alright, so we're going to take it out of the smut. We're going to put it in the rinse tank. Remember, each tank has its own rinse. Alright, now we're going to put it in the zincate. Now when you put aluminum in the zincate will start bubbling. It has a reaction with the aluminum. And we're going to leave that in there for 30 seconds. And then it'll go straight from here to the rinse and then directly into the nickel. So we got a few more seconds to go. Now, because this part is not copper plated, and I very seldom ever copper plate aluminum parts, normal time in the nickel bath with a copper plated part is about 15 minutes. But because this is straight aluminum and it's not copper plated, this will stay in the nickel bath for about 30 minutes. If it was a little bit larger part, I'd probably leave it in for 40 or 45 minutes. Alright, now that that part's rinsed, you'll see that it's got like a gray tint to the part. Now that is the zincate where it coated the aluminum. So this part's rinsed and ready to go. So we're going to take it over and we're going to put it directly into the nickel bath. And like I said, it will stay in this nickel bath for about 30 minutes. Now it's not necessary to have the power on when you put this part in the nickel. Alright, now I'm going to set the rectifier, I'm going to set the power on that. The normal operating volts for nickel is between 2 and 6. Because this is a small part, a very small part, I'm going to set it at its lowest setting, which is 2 volts. And I'm going to set the timer for 30 minutes. Now you want to be careful on aluminum parts, on actually any part, not to overdo the voltage in the nickel tank, because it will burn the part. Alright, we're going to let that cook in there for 30 minutes and we'll be back. Okay, well it's time to take this out of the nickel. Let's take a look at it. Now let's put it in the rinse. Alright, let's take a look. Oh yeah, that came out beautiful. Beautiful. Now you don't want to leave this out of the nickel before you go into the chrome for too long. After about 60 seconds, nickel will become passive and you'd have to put it in the metal activator. And then before you could go into the chrome with it. So now we've shut the rectifier off. We're going to put this down into the chrome tank. Now you want to make sure that when you set these parts in the different tanks that you get the part between the anodes. You don't want the part touching the anode. Now, when you start your power for your chrome, it takes 1 amp per square inch of metal on the chrome. Now this is a small part, so we're going to give it about 5 amps. But what you want to do is you want to go over the amperage by 10. In other words, if I'm going to run it at 5 amps, I'm going to run the power initially up to 15 amps. When I get it up to the 15 amps, then I'm going to run it back down to the 5 amps that I actually want to cook the part in the chrome, and then I'll set the timer. Now it only stays in the chrome for 5 minutes. Now what I'm going to do is after this part comes out of the chrome, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to chrome the other 3 pieces that we fixed in this video. So when we come back, all 4 pieces will be chromed and ready to go. Now with the aluminum that came out of the zincate, that stayed in the nickel tank for 30 minutes. Now the parts that are already copper coated, they only have to stay in the nickel tank for 15 minutes. And the part that we stripped the old chrome off of that we're going to re-nickel plate and re-chrome, that also only stays in the tank 15 minutes. So we're going to go ahead and let this cook in the chrome. It's starting to bubble real good, which means it's chroming good. So we'll do that, and after I chrome the rest of the parts, we'll be back. Okay, so here you have it. Here are all the parts that we started out in the beginning of the video. You remember the Ford emblems. There's the before, there's the after, there's the 51 Dodge license plate bezel, there's the steel bracket, and here's the chrome ring that we stripped the chrome off of. So now what we're going to do is take a little break here. I'm going to come back with the closing of the video. Okay, so that's it. Now let's surmise what we've learned in this. Pot metal, what's the steps? First thing you want to do is either bead blast it or sandblast it. Then you want to degrease it. Then you want to put it in the acid copper, rinse it, stays in the acid copper for 5 minutes. Rinse the part, put it in the bright copper, leave it in the bright copper for about an hour, take it out of the bright copper, rinse it, take it over, and then that's when you want to solder your pits. Now make sure you solder all your pits before you re-copper this part. You will have to start again with the cyanide copper because nothing will stick to pot metal except the cyanide copper. Steel. Steel's the easiest. You wash it, degrease it. Alright, now with steel, after you get it sanded in the way you want it, you can actually skip the straight copper, which is the cyanide copper, and go straight to nickel if you feel that your part is good enough. You can strike steel in nickel, but that's the only part you can strike in nickel. Alright, so what do we want to do? We want to wash it, degrease it. I prefer the strike copper, so you want to strike copper it for 5 minutes, rinse it, then put it in the bright copper for an hour. And you want to sand it, and you can use 180, 320, 400, and 600 sandpaper to get to where you want to be for your finished part. After that, that goes into the nickel for 15 minutes because it has bright copper on it. If you strike it without the bright copper, I would leave it in the nickel for at least 40 minutes and then 5 minutes in the chrome. Aluminum. Now aluminum is the hardest metal. Aluminum you have to degrease, wash it, then you can A, bead blast it, because most of the time they have an anodized finish on it, or you can hand sand it, or you can use the power sanders. Same procedure for the sanding. The nickel or the aluminum is porous, so therefore you have to make sure you've got it sanded smooth, or any little pit in aluminum will show up. So after you get it sanded and cleaned, then it goes in the ultrasonic for about 15 minutes. After the ultrasonic, it goes into the desmut. From desmut, it goes into zinc, the zincate. From zincate, it goes straight into nickel, of course rinsing between each step. Now, because the aluminum does not have any copper on it, I would leave that in the nickel tank for at least 40 minutes. After that, rinse, it goes into the chrome tank for 5 minutes. If you have any questions, you can reach us on the internet at sales@jlvproductions.com. We're also going to put up a website, possibly, that will all be listed on the JLVproductions.com website. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video as much as we enjoyed doing it for you. My name's Jim Varner for JLV Productions. Thank you.